And US history is at the same time as my pastoral thesis. So I was wondering if it'd be possible to have like US history in the library sometime?
Yeah. You can, we'll come up with, I didn't realize that there was any of those type of conflicts, but it doesn't matter. Yes, you let me know when you want to do it.
Okay.
If you want to take it the same, that's on Thursday.
I'd rather take it earlier if I could.
I will, because I still have some work to do on that particular test, but
Yeah.
if you, I mean, you could come by, you could do one of two things. We could work out an arrangement for you to do it once I have the online even one up and running at some point, or you can come on Wednesday if you're free to one of the periods where I'm giving another exam. I'm doing one at 11, and I'm doing one at 3 in the afternoon.
11 or 3? Well, I couldn't do 11, for sure.
But we'll come up with a plan. That's no problem.
Thank you.
Because the rules say at the bottom of the schedule that if you have 2 exams at the same time, or 3 on one day, you may make arrangements as needed.
It'd be kind of hard to do them at the same time.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily, I wasn't aware that we had scheduled them that way, but we'll make a way for that. Yeah. Okay, so we are coming to the end. Today, then Monday, whatever amount of time is necessary on Monday. Our prayer will begin. Today we're going to continue with the business side of America and the various kinds of integrated companies that we have. So let's have prayer and then we'll begin. So we pray that your special grace and blessing is present here in this class, and we pray for your help in each one of our lives, that you are bringing us to the end of this semester and to successfully finish out everything that is being that is done here. We pray for your special grace and blessing. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Okay, I do have a video which I will show about the way businessmen solve themselves. The titans of business today are somewhat demonized, like evil, wicked people. But back then, they would have seen themselves as individuals that were bringing a better life to the world by creating jobs and creating opportunity for others. And the fact that they got rich in the process, well, someone had to. And they were the ones putting out the risk. There were plenty of people who never made it big because they weren't as good or successful or careful or whatever. But the way big business was operating, eventually there were huge mega businesses. One might be seen as different kinds of integration. One might be called vertical integration, and that is when someone tried to control all the raw materials, transportation, and sales of a product, and they controlled the whole industry. And that might be a good example of something like Andrew Carnegie with steel. He not only made steel in America, and in some ways controlled the steel industry. You wanted to buy steel, you had to buy it from him. But he also controlled everything from the mines that produced the ore he needed, the rail lines that brought the ore to his factories, the factories that made steel, and the distribution and selling of steel was all owned by him. He didn't have to buy anything from anyone, and he was able to make money all along the way. In the food industry, this kind of vertical integration was also done by various other companies, such as Heinz, which started out making horseradish, but was famous for pickles, ketchup, and other products. The reason why they have the slogan 57 varieties has nothing to do with how many varieties they have. Even when they settled on 57 as their slogan, they already had more than 57 varieties of products that they made. But Heinz not only controlled made a company, but they owned farms that produced pickles, tomatoes, and all the other products, and the trucking companies that brought them into Pittsburgh where they made the products and then distributed them with their own company into stores. Same thing would be true of Van Camp. Anyone know what Van Camp makes? They have their fish company. You'll see frozen fish and other types of fish products under the Van Camp name. Franco-American, which has to do with like Italian tomato type products, tomato sauce and things of that nature. Armour and Swift were meat packing, hot dogs, and other products of that type. Oil was another one of these that had vertical integration, in which Standard Oil controlled the oil business from owning the oil reserves and extracting the oil to refining it and then selling the refined products, whether it was gasoline or making plastic or things of that nature, and selling that to consumers. Now, horizontal integration was different. That was combining companies within an industry to control a market. And this could be done several ways. One, by creating a pool. Several competing companies privately agree to drive up market and control costs and prices without actually joining forces and making one company. So it was sort of like a gentleman's agreement. Many of these kinds of arrangements are now illegal, and they can't do that. Another is called a trust or holding company. This is where legal instruments that allow one company to own stock in other companies open to the door to the merger management into one industry. Or there are companies who basically only buy stock in other companies with the hope of gaining controlling interest. Maybe a big, an example of this is Beatrice, that owned lots of, which is a venture capital company that owns a lot of other companies. This is how many people have made lots of money in what is called venture capitalism, where you put your money into other companies and you buy conglomerates. And even companies like Pepsi or some other company might own a lot of different things. Pepsi might own Quaker Foods, and Quaker Oats owns all kinds of food companies. And so that can also be another way of organizing companies. In 1901, Pierpont Morgan, J. Pierpont Morgan, bought Carnegie Steel for $500 million and created US Steel, the first billion-dollar company, by combining that with other steel companies that he already owned to form the largest steel organization in the United States. Now, let's take a look at the video that we have here.
Most everyone who we call these titans, namely from John D. Rockefeller, Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, Thomas Edison, they all have one thing in common. They all were of the view that put them in charge and they would solve problems.
I think they believed in something big. When you get a Carnegie and he's trying to put together a giant steel company, it takes a tremendous leap of faith to believe that if you created all this product, someone would want it.
I think that's true with all the great entrepreneurs, the Vanderbilts and the Fords and the Edisons. It was a mix of believing in an idea and believing that forces were converging to make that idea possible, to give it lift, to give it life.
They saw a bigger picture than most people saw, and were willing to put together things and capitalize on it, knowing that it would take some time to accomplish that.
Long live the electric light.
Thomas Edison, one of my favorite quotes from him was, "Vision without execution is hallucination." The vision aspect is critically important, but you also have to couple that with execution, the ability to take that idea and bring it to life. And that's what the great entrepreneurs of the American history have really had.
I think they were men of great character, great motivation, could sense what they were really delivering, even though they made money. There's nothing wrong with making money, but they had a sense of their destiny as such that they could create steel at a great price. Look what you could do with it. You could build buildings, highways, bridges, you name it, ships, at the right price. And that's what they did.
I doubt very much that any of these great captains of industry predicted 30 years in advance where they would be. But what they had was the ability to see possibilities, the courage to take risks to pursue those possibilities. And then as other possibilities came forward, they had some more courage, they took some more risk, and it built upon itself.
You know, you talk about seeing around corners as an element of success. That's what differentiates, oftentimes, a good leader from the careful manager. The manager is often managing today's life, keeping an orderly system, doing everything, and not seeing what's coming around that corner. And so that's a very important ingredient. Not many people have it. Not many people can predict that corner. Is it a train or a light? And which one is it? Is a characteristic of great leaders.
Now, advertising created more demand for a product. Probably the best example of this is around the turn of the century when smoking of cigarettes, as opposed to pipe tobacco and other things, became a national phenomenon when James B. Duke, the namesake for Duke University, who founded the modern tobacco industry, made smoking a national product by saying it was democratic and fashionable and creating a smoking brand, a whole bunch of different brands, Philip Morris, Marlboro, so forth, that created a sense that there was uniformity. You would be able to guarantee, just like any other national product, what a pack of cigarettes would be like. That was true of everything else. That was uniformity among products all across the country. federal government was qualified to regulate interstate commerce with railroads. The government was given that right under the Constitution and they exercised it. Interstate Commerce Act established the Interstate Commerce Commission, the first independent regulating body. And then the Sherman Antitrust Act outlawed contracts that restricted commerce. Now actually, that was found unconstitutional in that every contract restricts commerce in some way. If I have a contract with you that you're going to mow my grass and I'm going to pay you $20, it restricts commerce. I can't pay anyone else any other amount. I can't repay you even more. You must do it and I will pay you $20. I'm not free to do anything else. That restricts commerce. If on a whim I just decide I'm going to pay Olivia $25 to mow my grass, I can't do that if I have a contract with you. So what this said is eventually the Supreme Court landed on the idea that the contracts could not unreasonably restrict trade, and that's where we are even today. Investment banks provided capital by expanding big business in the 1890s. J.P. Morgan was the most successful investment banker in the United States. He would pull capital from all kinds of people who wanted to invest in his bank. He would then loan it out to people who wanted to start a company and enabled them to do that as long as they made a profit. The next problem was that of labor and unions. Labor was represented by the American Federation of Labor in 1900, a federation of labor unions organized in a manner that seeks to unify workers in a particular industry along lines of their craft or trade. And this meant that the Federation of Labor was would organize people by their job. And you can think of other organizations like this, like the Teamsters, if anyone knows, what industry is organized by the Teamsters Union? You know, Teamsters drive horses. But Teamsters don't drive horses anymore. They drive trucks. So Teamsters is there. There was also carpenters, plumbers, other types of labor of that type, and they were organized by class and skill. The managers organized against labor with the General Managers Association, and this led to a potential for strikes. Some of the first labor strife took place in the mining industry and in railroads. In 1877, 20 Irish miners who were part of the ancient order of the Hibernians, that is a sort of a fraternal organization from Ireland that can also double as a labor union, were executed for killing the management of a mine. This was also known as the Molly Maguires, and you may hear songs about them. And if you Google them on YouTube, you can hear all the kinds about the Molly Maguires. Anyway, the Molly Maguires were this ancient organization. In 1877, there was another great railroad strike that strangled railroads in the Midwest and resulted in 100 deaths and over $10 million in property damage, mostly resulting from the inability of transporting fuel and food, and riots and other violence that took place during the labor unrest. Eventually, the Army sided with management in suppressing the strike. 20,000 people rallied in support of the Working Man's Party in Chicago that year. And we're coming up to one of the most explosive labor unrest in Chicago at the Haymarket Square. Which is still there, but the Haymarket Square riot of 1866. Here, the Knights of Labor, another one of these fraternal organizations that kind of doubles as a union, was demanding an 8-hour day and higher wages from the McCormick Harvester Company. They made farm machinery. The strikers rallied in Haymarket Square. Because of the fact when they were assembling at the plant, they were attacked and 4 were killed. In response to this, someone, and it is hard to know who, but it is very likely that this was anarchists not associated with either side, just trying to stir up trouble, threw a bomb into the crowd of protesters at Haymarket Square. Kind of like January 6th, which gets out of control fast, and there may have been plants in the crowd trying to cause trouble. A bomb was thrown into the crowd and 67 people were killed or wounded by the bomb that went off. In response to this, over 600,000 workers went on strike. Now, the most important of these strikes, when everything came to a head, was the Homestead Strike of 1892. This was a work stoppage at the Carnegie Steel Works. Henry Frick determined to break the strike. Frick was Carnegie's man managing the factory, brought in 300 Pinkerton detectives but eventually they surrendered to the strikers in a fight. In response to that, 8,000 state militia were sent by the governor of Pennsylvania to break the strike. And the union lost, and the steel industry was not unionized until the 1930s. Basically, the army was sent in to break the strike.
July of 1892 brought forth one of the bloodiest collective labor confrontations in United States history. At this time, we were at the height of the Industrial Revolution. The United States had an insatiable demand for steel, and at the ready to feed this demand were Andrew Carnegie and his Carnegie Steel Empire. Andrew Carnegie was born in Scotland and immigrated to the United States as a teenager. Carnegie came from very humble beginnings, but he was an extraordinary business person. Through many well-timed and aggressive decisions, he was able to amass a steel conglomerate that controlled all of the elements needed for steel production. At one point, Andrew Carnegie was widely recognized as the wealthiest man on the planet. This wealth did not come by accident. He was a ruthless business person who often exploited labor in an effort to extract more profit. Homestead, Pennsylvania was the site of the labor conflict of 1892. Carnegie Steel was in disagreement with the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers over wages at the Homestead Steelworks plant. Their labor contract was set to expire, and they needed to come to an agreement. The public disagreement revolved around the wage scale for employees. However, the true and underlying reason for the conflict was Carnegie's deep disdain for collective bargaining. He resented any union interference to the operation of his company. He built Carnegie Steel, and he saw it as his right to run it unilaterally. Carnegie ruled with an iron fist and was willing to do anything and everything in his power to defeat the unions. Up to this point, he had successfully thwarted union recognition at every one of his steel mills except the Homestead Steelworks. While his intentions are now well known, he was very conscious of public opinion. He did not want to appear to be a strikebreaker or enemy of labor, and instead pretended to be a champion for labor rights. Carnegie was able to successfully forward his personal agenda while shielding himself from public scrutiny by having his plant manager, Henry Clay Frick, impose his will. Frick and Carnegie had much in common. Frick, too, had come from humble beginnings. He had amassed a sizable fortune through heavy-handed management tactics. He used the same management philosophy with the Union, and Carnegie was content to avoid the spotlight in the Homestead matter. Rather than wage a public war, Frick offered a deal that he knew labor could not accept. He bargained in bad faith by offering labor contracts that paid less in spite of ongoing increases to Carnegie's steel profitability. He argued that wages should go down when steel prices fall and rise when steel prices increased. Since wages were already low, workers had little incentive to accept his terms. As anticipated, negotiations broke down and Frick prepared for battle with the Union. Frick ordered the construction of a 3-mile fortification to the perimeter of the Homestead Steelworks by building a 12-foot wooden fence around the facility. He even equipped it with barbed wire and an observation deck. It was more akin to a prison than a steel mill. The fortification caused the workers to nickname the facility Fort Frick. Henry Clay Frick preempted the eventual strike by shutting down the entire mill and locking out all 3,800 workers. In spite of this, Union members held a vote and unanimously decided to reject Frick's last proposal and go on strike. The workers anticipated trouble from Frick in the form of union busters. Under the direction of strike leader Hugh O'Donnell, they set up patrols to search for and thwart approaching replacement workers or strikebreakers. They patrolled the Monongahela River in search of incoming parties, since they knew that it was the easiest way to move large quantities of people into town undetected. In addition to being a union member, Hugh O'Donnell was a first-generation Irish immigrant who worked in the mills. O'Donnell was clear that he wanted a peaceful strike, but he warned that scabs would be firmly prevented from entering the mill. Frick reached out to the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, the largest private security force in the country, for assistance. At one point, it was estimated that there were more Pinkerton detectives than U.S. Army soldiers. Frick wanted the Pinkertons to protect the scabs that he planned to bring in. On July 6, Frick arranged to bring in 2 barges full of Pinkerton agents down the Monongahela River. His goal was to secure the plant at the dock that led to the plant. Once they had secured both, he believed that he could safely bring in replacement workers via the same means. While Frick believed that he could secretly bring in the barges under the cover of darkness, the workers were prepared. Their patrol spotted the Pinkertons as they came up the river and quickly arranged to confront the detectives at the dock. The Union seized the mill by knocking down the fence and rushed to meet the Pinkertons at the foot of the river. As word quickly spread about the incoming forces, the mass of Homestead residents converged upon the river, and their numbers swelled to almost 10,000 men and women. They came armed with any and every type of weapon they could find. As the barges landed, Hugh O'Donnell met the Pinkertons to implore them to retreat. The angry mob grew louder and louder, and O'Donnell knew that there would be bloodshed. He wanted to do everything in his power to avert it. As the Pinkertons began to disembark the barge, a shot was fired. To this day, nobody is entirely sure of who fired that first fateful shot. A melee ensued and chaos took over. Shots rang in from all directions for over 10 minutes. The workers were determined to sink the barges and stop the Pinkertons. They soaked the raft with oil and lit it on fire before they floated it down the river in hopes of igniting one of the barges. They then loaded a rail car with dynamite and rolled it down the hill in hopes of earning a direct strike. They also loaded an old cannon with scrap steel and fired it in the direction of the barges. This effort was not very well coordinated because the cannon inadvertently struck one of the workers as it fired and missed wildly. As both sides suffered losses, they collected themselves to press on. The tugboat that had pulled the barges up the river was loaded with injured Pinkertons and abandoned the remaining detectives in the barges at the end of the river. Stranded and outnumbered, the agents grew increasingly worried and scared. At one point, they presented a white flag at the entrance of the barge, only to have it greeted with more bullets. After 12 more hours of battle, surrender was finally negotiated. The workers promised the Pinkertons that no further harm would come to them. The Pinkertons were unloaded from the barge and led into town. The residents of Homestead lined the 600-yard path on both sides and welcomed the agents with further hostility. The agents were heckled, punched, and kicked all the way into Homestead. They were battered with sticks and stones on their gruesome march through town. They asked for mercy, but the residents were angry and beat them further instead. The tattered and defeated Pinkertons were loaded onto a train and sent out of town. On this same day, the workers set fire to the barges that lay abandoned at the foot of the Monongahela River. In the days after the confrontation, the workers viewed the battle as a victory to their efforts. In their triumph, they rebuilt the wall around the mill and staffed the observation deck to guard against further threats from Frick. They were optimistic that they would emerge victorious in their standoff against Carnegie and Frick. The events that transpired at Homestead were published in newspapers around the country. Public support was divided in both directions. Some were sympathetic to the strife of the workers, while others viewed them as a lawless mob of criminals. When Carnegie received word of what had transpired, he cabled Frick to tell him that he should remain steadfast in his fight and never employ any of the strikers again. He was committed to his victory against the Union and was willing to keep the steel mill at a standstill rather than yield to the Union. Mayor John McLuckie contacted Pennsylvania Governor Robert Pattison to communicate that order was being maintained in town. Carnegie also contacted the governor and exerted considerable political pressure on him to act and remove the strikers from the mill. Governor Pattison found that he had little choice than to acquiesce to Carnegie's demands. On July 12th, 8,500 state militia soldiers arrived in Homestead to enact martial law. They recouped control of the mill and enabled Carnegie to bring in scabs to run the Homestead Steelworks. Over the ensuing months, the Union worked desperately to maintain solidarity. In time, charges were filed against the Union leaders for their participation in the conflict. They were charged with conspiracy and murder for the death of the Pinkerton agents. In just 4 short months, the Union started to crumble under financial demands. Union members began to cross picket lines and attempt to get their jobs back. Unfortunately, most of the workers were blacklisted by Frick and were unable to return to their former jobs. They found that scabs that were eager to take their jobs had easily replaced them. The straw that broke the camel's back came in the form of one Alexander Berkman, an anarchist who traveled to Pittsburgh to assassinate Frick on a misguided effort to support the Union. It's worth noting that Berkman's ideology was in striking contrast to that of the Union. They did not invite him to Homestead, nor were they aware of his nefarious plans. Berkman made his way to Frick's office and fired upon him at point-blank range. Berkman had never fired a gun before and failed miserably in his conquest. Frick endured a flesh wound to the neck and recovered in time to return to work the following week. While some were pleased to hear of Frick's injury, by and far, the public backlash was negative. The average American had no idea whether Berkman had acted alone or not. This act effectively nullified any remaining public support for the Union. The remaining strikers voted to return to work and join those who had already crossed the picket lines. By 1893, the majority of the strikers had been rehired on Frick's wage terms. The Union had been defeated.
You don't have to hear him sing. So, now here we see the Pullman Strike Company, and this is the next year. This will merge the labor unions with the socialist movement in America. The Pullman strike, does anyone know what the Pullman did? This is in Chicago too. they made sleeping cars for railroads. And all sleeping cars were made by the Pullman Company, no matter what train you were riding on. And this gave rise to Eugene Dobbs, this gentleman right here, who was the leader of the Socialist Party of the United States in 1897. Protesting living condition at the Pullman Company town, the American Railway Union refused to work on any train that had a Pullman car on it. So the railroad union supported, even though they had nothing to do with this, they supported this strike by striking and not operating any train that had a Pullman car. Eventually, there was all kinds of problems, including the burning of Pullman cars on trains to prevent them from being part of trains so that the union would be forced back to work. So they stopped transporting people in sleeping cars. Eventually, President Grover Cleveland ordered 2,000 federal troops to put down this conspiracy to restraint of trade. And if you go to Chicago, the Pullman Company has a historic site that talks about not only their plant, which is right here, but also the strike that occurred there.
George Pullman was a man of great stature. He achieved prominence in the 1870s for the construction of his gorgeous railway sleeping and dining cars. Pullman created his own little town on the outskirts of Illinois called Pullman, providing a place for the 12,000 men of Chicago families to help fabricate the cars, which helped the men earn money. Pullman looked like a complete and striving town in perfect harmony, but this is only an outer appearance. The Great Depression began to kick in, and the demand for Pullman's train cars plummeted. Because of this, George Pullman lowered the wages of his workers. On May 11, 1894, employees walked off the job in protest. Lowering the wages of workers was a big issue for them because they had already had a boatload of other expenses, like lodging. The workers then turned to the American Railroad Union, led by Eugene Victor Debs. He had a total membership of about 150,000 railroad workers by 1894. Debs called on all the ARU members to refuse to operate trains with Pullman cars. This began the Pullman boycott on June 26, 1894. Within 4 days, 125,000 workers on 29 railroads had quit work. This action brought the nation's rail traffic and commerce to a halt. On June 29, 1894, Debs held a peaceful get-together meeting, but after groups became enraged and set fire to nearby buildings and trains. They also derailed a locomotive. Transportation of goods were halted because strikers were walking off the job, obstructing railroad tracks and threatening and attacking strikebreakers. Thousands of armed deputies and federal troops sent by President Grover Cleveland battled the strikers, courts issuing injunction after injunction, making it legally impossible for strike leaders to continue the strike. New York Times said it was a struggle between the greatest and most important labor organization and the entire railroad capital. The soldiers joined with local authorities in getting the trains to run again. Debs ended up getting arrested, convicted, and sentenced to prison for defiance of court orders. The fighting between workers and police, the use of federal troops, and the jailing of key leaders ultimately caused the defeat of the Pullman workers. Pullman strike affected the overall welfare of the nation and its citizens, whether it was recognized at the time or not. There was also a vast amount of damages financially suffered by railroads. It was the control that Pullman thought he had over his workers is what led to the bitter labor struggle between him and his employees. At the end, the Pullman Palace workers lost their battle, and the ARU was destroyed. The Pullman strike of 1894 did not achieve what it was set out to do in the area of fair treatment and fair wages, but it still remains as a classic reminder of the labor movement's desire to overcome its endless obstacles.
Okay, here's our last slide. National unions. There are three that are dealing with here. The National Labor Union was the first national union designed to bring skilled and unskilled workers together. This was founded by William Savalas in 1866. Now, most unions were either for one or the other, skilled or unskilled labor. Skilled labor are all kinds of the things that, for guilds, people, electricians, plumbers, bricklayers, all of those types of unions, teamsters and various things, and you have to have a particular skill set in order to get into the union. Then there are unskilled laborers, which may very well be the people who work in the steel mill or some other thing. They have skills too, but they're just more general labor. And if you remember, in that in the Homestead Act, the Homestead the Homestead strike, the problem was that the scabs could do the job just as well as the regular employees, and once they were hired, they could fulfill the job. So really, they didn't have any bargaining issue that enabled them to survive. Another one of these unions is the Knights of Labor. This was a secret society with elaborate rituals like special handshakes and passwords to get into the meetings to bind workers together. They became an open union in 1881 with a membership of more than 700,000 workers. And they collapsed because it was too ambitious and too unwieldy, and also because of what was thought to be their involvement in the Haymarket Square riot and bombing that killed so many people, and they were seen as violent and uncooperative. The most famous of these unions, though, and the one that still exists today in one form, is the American Federation of Labor. This was led by Samuel Gompers. He looks like a union man, I suppose. Samuel Gompers. He sounds like a character from a from a Charles Dickens novel. Made unionized labor as a way of life and discouraged workers from becoming capitalists. In 1904, there were 1.2 million members in his union, and they lobbied Congress for a national holiday to celebrate the workers, and that became Labor Day in 1894. Now, the American Federation of Labor is for unskilled workers. The CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, is a conglomerate union for skilled labor, and those two unions will eventually merge to become the AFL-CIO, going by their initials. And that's the big major union that controls much of the labor of the United States today.
Samuel Gompers was born in London, England in 1850. As a young boy, Samuel rolled cigars. Not for himself, it was his job. In 1863, his family emigrated to New York. 1 year later, he rolled cigars again, and this time he joined the Cigar Makers International Union. In 1875, he was elected president of the Cigar Makers International Union. That capacity for leadership led him to help form the Federation of Organized Trade and Labor Unions. Later, it was reorganized as the American Federation of Labor, or the AFL. Gompers was elected the AFL's first president, a position he would hold 40 years. As president, he championed 3 principles as a union leader. The first principle was his unions would be one of skilled workers. The second principle was to work for economic rather than political power. The third principle was, when unions were forced into politics, union members should be nonpartisan. The 2 main initiatives that Gompers worked for also could be considered his legacy: the 8-hour workday and collective bargaining. In a world where unions are seen as unnecessary, and ideas like the 40-hour workweek and collective bargaining are under fire, we can remember the man who started the fight for both, Samuel Gompers.
Okay, well, we are done, and we will not have class on Monday. We're done. Use the time to get ready for your final. You can download the study guide and study. If you want to come here and study together, that would be fine. I'll even lead you in a study session on Monday. But if you want to do that, you can tell me. But we won't have class otherwise Monday, and you can, I'll see you at your final if you don't have a conflict. We'll get together and figure out when is best for you to take it and how to deliver that. All right, so, yeah. We'll see you at finals time, yes.
Teaching language class, is that part on Monday night?
Yes, it
At
is.
7, so I will, not possibly, but be going to Pennsylvania on Monday. Would I be able, because it's a paper test, would I be able to take it?
This is for school?
Yeah, or for work,
Yeah.
a meeting. Would I be able to take it like on Wednesday with another class as proctor?
Yeah, we'll make some arrangements.
Okay, thank you.